We're talking today with Gabriel Mancil of Woodbridge, Virginia, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, now start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born July 16th, 1990 in Valdosta, Georgia.
Okay.
I lived there for about 5 years. My parents relocated to Middle Georgia and near Warner Robins Air Force Base. And my dad went back to school, my mom worked.
Okay, and what were your parents doing for a living as you grew up?
My mom was an RN. My dad went back for electrical. He worked at the Robins Air Force Base for a while, working on the targeting system for the F-22 Raptor, repairing that stuff.
Okay, so basically kind of civilian working
Yep.
for the military at that point. Okay, and then when did you finish high school?
My parents homeschooled me, so I did a little bit of homeschooling for a while.
Okay.
I got behind a little bit when my dad went back to school, so after a while I decided just to go do my GED
Mm-hmm.
for a placement test. So I went and just took that, got my GED.
Okay, and what year did you do that?
I got my GED March of 08.
Okay, now along the way, of course, 9/11 happened. What do you remember about that day?
I remember my mom, I believe my dad was at school or work. My mom had a meeting at work, so we had a babysitter, and it was pretty early in the morning. So I had actually went and turned the TV on to watch cartoons, and I believe they interrupted the cartoons for a news announcement. And I was 11 at the time, so I knew a little bit about it, but not a whole lot. And that was on for the whole morning, so I watched, I believe, the second plane hit,
Mm-hmm.
and then I watched it most of the day. And then I started trying to watch the news more and more to understand a lot better.
Okay. Now, at what point did you think you might be interested in going into the military?
My granddad was in the Marines for 20 years. He served 2 tours in Vietnam and drove tanks and stuff like that. And I always looked up to him a lot, so it's always something I wanted to do. I had an uncle that was in for a while, another uncle that tried getting in but had bad eyes, so couldn't get in. So it's always something I wanted to do.
Okay. All right. And then when do you actually decide to enlist?
I tried signing up right before I got my GED, and I tried to sign up when I was 17.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't really taking anyone at that time. And because I had a GED instead of a high school diploma, they considered me a high school dropout. So whenever I went to talk to the Navy, Army, and Marines, they said they considered me a high school dropout, so they wouldn't take me.
Okay. So what did you do about that?
I didn't have any, we lived out in the middle of nowhere, so we didn't have any computers or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I started working a part-time job right when the recession hit at a local grocery store for a little while, and I would go to the recruiters every couple weeks and talk with them. I would get conflicting stories, and then after a while I went into talked to one recruiter at the Army, told me I could go get some college credits at a local community college, and then that would count as furthering my education. They would let me in.
Mm-hmm.
So I signed up for classes the next day, did 2 semesters at a local community college, and then signed right up.
All right. Now, when you did enlist, did you have the opportunity to pick possible specializations, or at least express a preference?
I scored pretty high on the ASVAB when I took the ASVAB. I believe I qualified for everything except military intelligence
Mm-hmm.
and a couple other jobs. I remember my recruiter was telling me I should go for MP or something not higher, and I told him I wanted to go infantry
Okay.
because that's what I always wanted to do. I always dreamed of going to sniper school.
Mm-hmm.
And he tried to convince me otherwise, but told him I wanted 4-year contract in infantry.
All
And
right.
that's what I signed up for.
Okay. So where do you go for basic training?
Everyone goes to Fort Benning. Went there for 16 weeks, and after I graduated that, I got high school, hometown recruiting. So they sent you home, you worked with the recruiters trying to recruit people. I got there right after everyone went on spring break, so there was no one there.
Okay, let's back up to the basic training. I think when you're in the military, you take it for granted. Everybody knows what that is, but less than 1% of the population goes in these days, and most people don't. So describe the process. What happens to you over the course of those 16 weeks?
I went to OSET, which is the one station unit training.
Mm-hmm.
So you go for your initial 8 weeks of basic training, like everyone else does, no matter what branch you go into. Which I believe the Navy or Air Force varies a little bit, so it's a little bit shorter. After that, you get a 36-hour pass. You get to hang out with family, have a small ceremony. And then you come back and you'll actually have the same drill instructors. And then you'll go for another 4 weeks.
But now that's infantry training at that point.
Infantry training.
Okay. So
And it's more of a continuation. You start off at the basics and start working together. And then once you come back for the last 4 weeks, it's pretty much the same thing. It's just more advanced tactics. You're kind of going up to applying everything you learn in the last 4 weeks. You start applying it.
Okay. What do they do in the first couple of weeks?
The first couple of weeks, they just call it Shark Week. You're filling out lots of paperwork, getting issued all your gear, and it's just a lot of chaos. Everyone's still trying to get integrated. You get your head shaved, shots.
Okay. And then when the training itself begins, what do they emphasize first? I mean, because the tradition is there's a lot of sort of drill and discipline and that kind of stuff, and just following orders.
When you first go in, where I went in, you go to everyone starts off at 30th AG, which is at Fort Benning. It's the in-processing station. So you actually start there for about a week. You come in and you start going through all of your in-processing stuff. So that's when you get your shots, your haircut. They don't want to really hurt you or do anything when they first start off.
Okay.
So for me, when we got off the buses at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, it was pretty relaxed. They yelled a little bit, but it's nothing like you would see in the Marine training videos like I had anticipated.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all getting everything going.
Right.
And then after about a week or so, right after Valentine's Day is when our drill instructors actually came up. We all sat down on our duffel bags to get lined up. They picked off who they wanted in each platoon. And then that's when we actually made our march to our barracks, and then everything else started.
Okay.
So that's when the shark attack, I guess you could say, it started.
All right. And so how does that actually work? And you said it was different from the old movies and that
Right.
kind of thing. But how do they kind of turn you from civilians into soldiers?
I guess it's hard to explain it, just thinking about it. It's more of just you're experts at the basics, so you pretty much try and strip everyone down. You don't get to pick who your friends are going to be, who your bunk mates are going to be. It's kind of like Full Metal Jacket when you go in. We had a bay, there was a zone painted in the middle of the room. You were never allowed to touch it. You had to walk all the way around the bay to get to different bunks. So I was on the far end, so if I wanted to speak to my friend, I either had to walk all the way around if they weren't on the far end.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just start at the very basics where you're shaving every day. Some people don't want to shave every day, if you need to shave too or not. We had some guys that could get away without shaving for a week, and they would have to go in there and make sure they shaved every day.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's correct.
And what happens to somebody who doesn't play along or do what they're told?
It's more like group punishment. If one person messes up, then everyone's wrong. Some stuff, if it's more of a tricky situation, you're not really sure what's right. We were always taught that as long as everyone was together and everyone could make one group decision, then a lot of times we wouldn't get punished as bad.
Mm-hmm.
And that changed and got less and less as we got on. So it's more of an emphasis on one unit versus individuals.
Okay. All right. And then over the course of the full 16 weeks, what range of training do you get in terms of equipment or tactics or things like that?
The first couple weeks is just going through the basic movements. From what I can remember, for me it was just kind of going through and just trying to survive, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Just getting used to PT every morning. You get in a routine where you get up, brush your teeth, shower. I remember showers, we only got 1 or 2 showers the first couple weeks we were there. We got 30 seconds for showers. So you're trying to get used to showers. We figured out pretty quickly that you could turn the showers on and heat them up first, then send the guys in.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was first in line the first couple times and I got cold showers. So we figured that out. After the first couple weeks, you get your rifle. For safety reasons, they would lock them up for us every night. But whenever we had our rifles, we had to carry them around with us everywhere. Just getting used to marching around.
Okay. And what model rifle were you carrying at that point?
It was the M4.
Okay. All right.
And then at some point, I believe towards the end, you go through some combat training, basic combat training, and you go through your weapons training,
Mm-hmm.
where you get trained on the different machine guns, rifles, rifle qualification, and some of the claymores, rocket launchers, and stuff like that, like the AT-4.
Okay. How long did it take you to kind of get with the program or kind of get as comfortable as you're going to get with training?
I always struggled at running, so that was one of the biggest hard parts for me. But once I got that down pat, everyone else was in pretty much the same boat. There had been a couple people that went to ROTC, kind of had an idea of how it went. My bunkmate had actually quit about 3 weeks into it, and we got some other people who had re-enlisted.
Mm-hmm.
My bunkmate ended up being in the Marine. The guy who slept next to me and my bunkmate that I ended up getting paired with was prior service. He had been in the Marines for 4 years, and he came in after like week 3, so he got to skip the initial training phase.
Right.
Because they have red, white, and blue phase, so you start off in different phases. The first phase is just kind of getting everything integrated,
Mm-hmm.
and then he came in the second phase. So he helped a lot
Okay.
as far as just helping us get together as a unit.
All right. And in general, how do you think that the drill instructors treated you?
I thought they were pretty relaxed, pretty fair. They had told us after the first couple weeks, and we kind of got to know everyone and them a little bit. We had 3 different drill instructors. I believe one was artillery, one was infantry, and I believe the third one was infantry as well.
Mhm.
They said they do 2-year cycles, I believe. But the company before us, they completely destroyed them. Where no matter what they did, they were wrong. With us, as long as we were right and as a group, acted as a group,
Mm-hmm.
then for the most part, they left us alone.
Okay. Were those different sets of instructors then?
It was the same instructors, but they do different training cycles.
Okay.
So they would do, the company that graduated before us,
Mhm.
they just got destroyed. I know the platoon that was upstairs above us, they got destroyed. They would do jumping jacks and get smoked, getting corrective training sometimes where the whole building would shake. And I had to go up there a couple times to get someone, and it's just, you can feel and smell the sweat coming out of the room.
Mm-hmm.
Where us, it was more whenever you screwed up, more like a parent mentality.
Okay. And do you have any sense of why there was a difference?
They said they just kind of got bored, kind of how they wanted to do each cycle.
Okay.
The drill sergeant would come in sometimes, and you could tell where he wasn't having a good morning, or we screwed up too much in one day. And we had the PG, who was the platoon commander, and they would take the guy who was the worst at that time, and they would make him platoon commander as part of a punishment.
Okay.
So they tried to make the punishment fit the crime, I guess,
All right.
to an extent.
But basically, you got relatively lucky then.
Pretty much, for the most
Okay.
part.
All right.
The training-wise, it stayed the same, but the severity of the punishment would vary.
Okay. All right. So now you get through that 16 weeks. Now do you get further training, or do you go now to an active duty assignment?
I got 2 weeks of hometown recruiting, so they sent me
Yeah,
home.
that's right. You had that part.
And then after that, I got sent out to Fort Riley for the 128,
Okay.
and that's when I first got to my unit.
Okay. Now, explain to people who don't know the terminology. Okay, first of all, where's Fort Riley?
Fort Riley, Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
It's the home of the 1st Infantry Division,
Right.
and I was in the 28th Infantry Regiment.
Right. So 1st Battalion. Which company were you in?
I was in Charlie Company.
Okay. All right. And that's an old regular Army unit.
Yes,
goes
it's an
back.
old regular Army. I believe Audie Murphy was in there. They had the Audie Murphy board every couple months where you could go through and try and get the Audie Murphy award.
Mhm. All right. And what was the unit doing at the time you joined it?
When I first got there, everyone was on leave from Iraq.
Okay.
They had just got back, reintegrated, and they all went on leave. So it was really relaxed for the first couple weeks. There's not a whole lot out there, so I would go to work. There wouldn't be a whole lot to do. It took me almost 2 weeks to end process. So it's just a lot of sitting around.
Mm-hmm.
And it was definitely a lot different once everyone got back. Because
Okay.
they were all gung-ho to get back in training.
Okay. So now they do come back. Do you have a sense that there were, how many people do you think were new guys, or what proportion of your company maybe were new people?
A good bit. I was one of the 3rd or 4th person that was pretty new. Some of the other guys that I ended up deploying with had gotten there a couple months before me.
Mm-hmm.
One of my friends that showed up the day after me was actually from the same company as me in basic training. He was just in the platoon
Mm-hmm.
that lived above me. So I'd seen him around, and I recognized his name and I recognized his face when we got there.
Mm-hmm.
And we ended up getting put in the same platoon. And then over the next couple months, we got more and more people.
Okay. Now, when a unit has come back from Iraq, then do they have sort of different stages of training or activity? That's because they want you. I mean, are they expecting to have to go and deploy somewhere again, or do they just have a standard routine that you do indefinitely?
For the most part, when I had first got there, I heard that the company I was going to had just gotten back.
Mm-hmm.
I don't recall how soon they had been back, if they had been back for a couple months, 6 months, when they had went on leave, or if that was just the block leave period that had rolled around.
Mm-hmm.
But I know when I first checked in, before I even made it to my company, they told me we were getting ready to deploy, and they had told me February,
Mm-hmm.
which only gave us a couple months to get ready. So I was pretty nervous about that. And then as February approached, they started pushing it back a little bit farther. But we do a lot of, whenever the ranges are available, we would go out. Since we're infantry, sometimes we'll just go out to an empty field just to do land navigation and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then some days there's training exercises. I was there for about 6 weeks. We went out and did a 2-week FTX. We went through and really got a lot of training.
Okay, so the FTX, like those field
The
training
field training
exercise.
exercise, yeah.
Okay. Now, how much did the experienced people tell you about what had happened, say, in Iraq, or what goes on when you're in a place like that?
As far as stories and stuff like that, not a whole lot. It was more like, you're the new guy, you don't know anything. And I knew that, so I just tried to keep up the best I could.
Mm-hmm.
I still had a lot of trouble with running, so it was just PT every day. It was a lot of, not so much endurance, but it was a lot more just running over moving long distances over a short amount of time versus endurance.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the guys I just got back from Iraq still had the Iraq mentality versus Afghanistan mentality, where you could go building to building. And then once you went to Afghanistan, they didn't really understand you had to go long distances over longer periods of time. You're going to carry more weight. You're not going to be able to move as fast. You're going to be a lot higher altitude. You're going to have cold weather versus hot.
Okay, so they've got a reasonable idea of what conditions they are preparing you for at that
Mentally, they knew what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
There were still some arguments about how best we should train.
Mm-hmm.
And then towards the end, about 6 months into it, because I got to my unit and everyone got back around August of 2011,
Mm-hmm.
and then I deployed in May of 2012. About 6 months into it, I got a new team leader who had transferred from a different company, and he actually been to the same post that we were told we were going to.
Mm-hmm.
And he's one of the guys who actually originally helped set it up. So he tried to help some of the other team leaders and squad leaders understand the differences between going in Iraq, building to building,
Mm-hmm.
and then going to Afghanistan, where you're at 8,000 or 9,000 feet.
Okay. Now, had he been to both places? Or
Off the top of my head, I can't recall.
Okay, but he'd been to Afghanistan, so he knew that part of it. Did you notice any kind of friction, or if you're a team leader that's below the level of a squad leader or a platoon sergeant or something like that? So was he telling people higher up than him how they should be doing things?
Not trying to tell them how to do it. He was a team leader. He was an E5. We had some of our team leaders at the time were private first class,
Mm-hmm.
so they weren't very senior in rank. Some
Right.
of them were the new guys who had excelled in some of the training and stuff like that. So we're always short a little bit of people, so it's more of, we know what you need to do, but it's going to be a little bit different than what you think.
Yeah.
I know I had some of them that had just got back from Iraq who had told me when you step off the airplane, it's going to feel like a blow dryer in your face, and I don't think they really understood exactly how much different it was going to be. When I first stepped off the plane, I was in Afghanistan. I thought there was going to be like a big blow dryer in my face, and it was like 69 degrees and a little bit chilly.
Yeah.
So-
If you show up at the wrong time of year, you might still get the blow dryer thing, but
Yeah.
not there. Okay. So now, do you do all of that preparatory training at Fort Riley, or do they move you to different places to train?
We did all of our preparatory training at Fort Riley until the very end. Then we did a FTX, which usually went for big training movement out in California, and that's more of all the companies and stuff get together and work together. So it's more of like a leadership course for them,
Mm-hmm.
but that allows us to kind of work together.
Okay. Now, do they do that in a desert environment, or?
Yes, it's a desert environment. It was pretty cool. A lot of the terrain and stuff we saw over there out in California, out in the desert, was very similar to what we actually saw when we deployed.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't quite as flat, but there were a lot of small mountains and stuff we got to go on. The environment, as far as the sandy conditions, they had sporadic buildings built all over the desert, convoys and stuff like that, was actually very close to what we actually encountered.
Okay. Now, over the course of training for Afghanistan, did they try to teach you anything about the culture, the society there, or how to deal
Yep.
with the people?
As you go through a lot of training stations that they have set up. So you go through specific scenarios where you're doing down casualties and stuff like that. You're going through and moving through communities and stuff like that. And they have actors who can actually speak the language and help get you used to walking through cities where you have people just running up, trying to grab your pockets, wanting to come up and touch you, throw stuff at you.
Mm-hmm.
They'll pretend they're throwing rocks at you. They'll yell at you. They'll try and communicate with you. And you have to learn to kind of communicate non-verbally.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there is some idea of some idea what you're going to do out there, what might happen to you, because
Right.
it doesn't always happen. It depends on circumstance.
And they try and base the training that you're doing off of where you're actually going to be deploying to.
Right.
Some units aren't up for rotation, so they're not going to be deploying.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll just come in and do a basic training scenario on the current world environment of where they could possibly be deployed to.
Mm-hmm.
Us, they try to critique it to where we were actually training for what we would see downrange. And I got a much better understanding of what I was going to be going to once I deployed.
Okay. All right. Now, once the time comes, how do they get you to Afghanistan?
We actually went to Topeka, Kansas. We got Greyhound shuttle buses that drove us up there. It was only about an hour away. And there's a small airport, and they actually shut the whole airport down. So after we pack all of our gear up, jump on some Greyhound buses and ride out, then we just walk right through the airport terminal, which is only 100 yards or so, right onto the plane.
Okay. Now, did you fly military aircraft or chartered civilian? Or?
I believe it was a charter civilian.
Mm-hmm.
We did have, I believe it was 2 purple F-15s, F-16s that actually escorted us, and I got the window seat.
Okay.
So that was pretty interesting.
All right. They fly out of Topeka. Then where do you go?
We went to Topeka. We had a layover in Holland, Germany, at an old Air Force base there.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to see, I believe, some of the old World War II hangars and stuff there. And then they just refueled for a couple hours. Then we went there to Kyrgyzstan and Manas,
Mm-hmm.
which is like a small little base there. We were there for a couple of days until our transport came. Then I believe we went on a C-130 out of there to Afghanistan. Then once we got into Afghanistan, we went to a lot smaller forward operating base. I believe Sharana, Fob Sharana.
Okay.
And then went from there, we took Chinooks out to our actual COP,
Okay. And that's
which is our command outpost.
okay. Yeah. So you're getting to smaller and smaller
Yep,
places.
smaller and smaller. And we actually went from Sharana, Fob Sharana, and we got on Chinooks 2 or 3 different times.
Mm-hmm.
And the weather was too bad, so they had to turn around. So I believe it was the 3rd or 4th try we actually made it.
All right.
So
Now,
it took about a week or week and a half to actually get all the way.
okay. And then as you're stopping in these places, when you're in Kyrgyzstan or then get to Afghanistan or you're at Sharana, what kinds of things catch your attention?
Driving into Kyrgyzstan, we got there late at night, and I thought it was pretty interesting. It looked like something out of Call of Duty. The old abandoned buildings, and you're driving through the checkpoints. It looked like something just like out of one of the Call of Duty games.
Okay.
Where you're going through, like when you do there's one where you go through Chernobyl.
Mm-hmm.
It looked really eerie like that. And then you know you're getting closer and closer. And after a while, you just get really excited to actually get there.
All right. Now, did you spend much time at Sharana, or was that just a transit point for you?
It was pretty much a transit point. We were only supposed to spend a couple of days there. We had some guys who had actually left a couple of days before us, and we ended up bumping into them. They got held back with weather.
Mm-hmm.
So we were supposed to be there 2 or 3 days, they told us, and I think we were there almost a week,
Okay.
just waiting for the weather to clear.
And what sort of facilities did they have at Sharana?
It's like a small tent city. They have different sections. We only stayed in our small section with some tents, and it's just rows and rows of tents.
Okay. And do you know if there were Afghan soldiers there, or were they all Americans there?
Not there, just all Americans from what we saw. I believe it was Sharana when we were walking around. We got to walk around a little bit. We had to go find some blankets since we ended up getting stuck there for a couple days.
Mm-hmm.
Most of our gear was still packed up. So we actually went and got some blankets, and we bumped into some Marines, saw some Air Force people walking around. And that was really the only interaction we had with anyone.
Okay. All right. But now you finally get out to your command outpost. All right. Now, was your whole company based there?
We had 2 platoons,
Okay.
so 2 out of 4 of our platoons were stationed there.
And how many men per platoon?
I want to say there's around 46 or so,
Okay.
45 to 50 per platoon, and then we had, I believe, another, at least half a platoon, if not a platoon of support people there. So we had the company commander and some 2 mechanics, a cook, 2 cooks, some other personnel there to work the command center.
Okay. Now, you said mechanics. Did you have vehicles there?
We had 4 vehicles. I believe there was a 4-wheeler that got blown up before we got there, and there was a small utility vehicle like a Gator
Mm-hmm.
that you could put in some small cans of gas or something like that.
And did you have any trucks or Humvees or?
And we had 4 ATVs or MTVs, and then we had 1 MRAP.
Okay. And describe what those are.
Those are,
Well, the MRAP, is that an armored Humvee?
so I'm trying to think. And we had 1 Max Pro, and we had. Sorry, I'm getting a little mixed up with
Okay.
finals. I know we had Matt V. We called them Matt V's, M-V or Matt-V,
Okay.
and that was more of a off-road vehicle. You could it carried 4 people plus a gunner. We had 4 of those, and it had RPG netting all around it
Mm-hmm.
for RPGs, and it was more designed for off-road use. You could deflate the tires, and it had different settings, more for mobility.
Mm-hmm.
And we had 1 Max Pro that actually wasn't functioning all the way, and we just used that to keep the gate shut. So if anyone tried driving in through the front gate, they would just hit the truck. And that
Mhm.
was more of a personnel carrier, and that had the gunner, driver, passenger, and I believe it could carry up to 6 people sitting down in the rear. But that was not designed for the terrain it was in.
All right. And what sort of defenses did the position have?
We had our small cop, based on, it was positioned more on the side of a valley, and then we had a small hill that was over beside us that we used for an outpost, and that was manned with a camera that could look around 360 degrees
Mhm.
and see just about anything near us.
Okay. And did you have concertina wire or anything else like that?
We had HESCOs, which are just big, small fencing with mesh netting like on a
Mhm.
box spring on the
Okay.
inside, and you can just pop them up. They can airlift them in,
Mhm.
pop them up, and then just use a backhoe to fill them up with dirt, and then you just stack them on top of each other.
Okay. And then were you dug in? Did you have bunkers or sandbags or anything like that?
We had the unit before us, my team leader that I previously had, he left right before we deployed because he had got out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was supposed to get out. He ended up getting called back and ended up deploying for like 3 or 4 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So he went to a different company.
Okay.
But he had helped build it up. They had hard structures where they had 5 or 6 layers of sandbags and concrete and some dirt they had threw up on the roof.
Mm-hmm.
So we had our barracks area was halfway secure, and then we had at least 1 bunker for each of the sleeping quarters, and then over near the command center that were hardened concrete with sandbags that could withstand a mortar round.
Okay. So when you get out there, what is your unit's job?
Our main job was just to support the Afghan National Army, the ANA, in some of their patrols, and then just do foot patrols of the actual surrounding area. It was pretty remote, and I believe we were at around 7,000 feet in elevation, and we're at the more of the entrance to a small valley.
Mhm.
So we patrolled everything that was more towards the west of us. There was a couple small villages, and we would just patrol around there
Okay.
and help the ANA in whatever they were doing at the time.
Okay. And what was your impression of the Afghan National Army?
The first guys we got were really good. I remember the first day or 2 we got there, they had saw a light in the bazaar, which was a small town that was about a mile away from us. And one of the guys up in the ANA up in the guard tower just opened up with a 50 caliber machine gun, just shooting into the city.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that might have been the first or second night I was there. So
Okay.
my first impression was we were getting overrun and that something bad was happening. So we threw all of our gear on,
Mm-hmm.
ran to where we were supposed to, waiting for further instructions. And it ended up just being some of the other guys that hadn't left yet, that we were getting ready to replace, told us that they did that from time to time.
Mm-hmm. They just get a little bit trigger happy. Or
Yeah, they
something.
got a little trigger happy.
All
But
right.
going on patrols and stuff, they were very good. They would help us a lot.
Yeah, and what kind? I mean, you said, what were they good at, or what were they doing well?
just working with us, they were really good. They would come up, try and talk to us. They were really friendly.
Mm-hmm.
Further on, after the first couple weeks, they left, and we got a new set of guys that would come in. It's a lot different than it is over here. There's no background checks and stuff. A lot of time it's just you show up and say, I want to help, and they just give you a gun. A couple times on the OP, my team leader was walking around looking at them and found one guy that was doodling in a notebook a map of our entire little cop, and he had all the barracks quarters, our main command post, and everything sketched out on a notebook.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of them, you can't prove it, but you know they're not as friendly as they seem.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a lot of green on blue situations where Afghan National Army and stuff were going around just shooting people. So you always had to be on your toes.
Okay.
So,
And how much Taliban activity was there?
our cop was actually, we're about 2 miles from Pakistan.
Mm-hmm.
And we were from what we were told, we were the training post for the new incoming Taliban that were training on their mortars. So it would actually go out there and we would be the target for the new recruits.
Mm-hmm.
So as we were told from the guys we were replacing, the first mortar rounds they would shoot at us, we got probably 5 or 6 a day at minimum. And it would just go every single day, 2 or 3 times a day. They would shoot 5 or 6 and wait. They would shoot 5 or 6 more. And it started out being 200 or 300 yards apart, and they would be 500 meters away from the cop. And they were just really sporadic. And then every day they would just get closer and closer. Towards the end, they were shooting them probably within 50 feet of our barracks that we were staying at.
Did
And
you
they would hit right on the edge. Our barracks were backed up against one of the back corners,
Mhm.
and they would hit on top of or right over outside the HESCOs, probably within 100 feet or so. So it got pretty good. And then all of a sudden it stopped for 3 weeks. And then it started back up again, and they were terrible again.
Okay. Did you have any means of responding to the mortar fire?
We could respond to mortar fire, but in order to do that, for safety reasons and stuff like that, where we were at, everything had to be airlifted in. So all of our food, mail, everything else got airlifted in. So it actually, the gunners would have to, the crew operating the mortar system would have to go and get permission, send it up to the top. They would have to send it to battalion. They would have to get permission to fire. They would have to get relayed back to us, and then they would be allowed to fire.
And how long does that take?
It seems like an hour, but sometimes it's only a couple minutes,
Mm-hmm.
5 or 6 minutes at the most. But a lot of times, sometimes we thought they were using mortar tubes with ice. They would put ice in the tubes, just a little bit to keep it from firing. They would slip it in, walk away,
Mm-hmm.
and then 20 minutes later they would shoot them off. We heard reports they were using timers. We never found any timers. But a lot of times at the mountain pass, they would just drive up in the back of a pickup truck. They would drop them down the tube, shoot them off, 2 or 3 at a time, and they would take off again around the pass. And we would never be able to actually physically see them.
Right.
We couldn't shoot back off before they came back around.
Okay. Were they firing them from within Afghan territory?
It was within Afghanistan.
Okay. And do you think would they just come in across the border and shoot at you and leave, or?
I think they were in the same area.
Mm-hmm.
We were a couple miles. Trying to remember how we were positioned. I believe they were north of us.
Mm-hmm.
They would come in from the north and they would shoot. We were south. The border would be over towards the east.
Okay.
So they would come in, shoot at us, turn around and drive back. So they weren't coming across the border, but we believe some of the fighters were coming from Pakistan into Afghanistan,
Okay.
and then working out of Afghanistan.
All right. Now, would the Afghan army units try to go into the areas that the firing came from, just patrol and see what they could find?
I believe sometimes they would just shoot at them. So most of the time it was just them jumping down behind rocks and stuff like that, like we did. There wasn't a whole lot they could do. They would be far enough away. Small arms fire and stuff wouldn't really do it. You'd have to reach out with close air support or mortars. And by the time anyone got a chance to actually shoot back at them, for the most part, they would get back. As time went on, we got an idea of where they would shoot from, and they would already have the coordinates loaded in. And then the second they would shoot them off, someone would be standing by. They tended to do it early in the morning or in the evening around 4 or 5 o'clock. So they would be ready. The mortar team would be ready. And the second the shots went off, they would already have battalion on the phone. and we got a couple of them doing it.
Okay. I guess, but I was also thinking more generally. I mean, would you patrol? I mean, at other times of day or whatever, would you patrol the places where they were shooting from?
Originally, we were told we were going to be going out only in the day, and we weren't going to be doing any night missions.
Mm-hmm.
And then we tried going out in the morning because there was a small hill that was about a mile away, and you could actually crawl up on the backside of it and see just over the Hescos.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't see everything, but you could see whenever we were leaving. And we were at the side of a valley, so the only way to actually get out was through one gate, and they could see us coming out every time. So after the first couple weeks, we started getting shot at every single time we left the gate.
Mm-hmm.
So we started getting outside the gate before they could shoot at us, and then they would just wait for us to come back in because we had to come back in through the same gate. So no matter how you switched your pattern up, eventually you got to come back into one funnel. So we ended up switching up and just doing strictly night patrols when we could.
Mm-hmm.
And we ended up we nicknamed it the Margon Mile because we'd get in before we entered the base again every time we went out throughout the night, or if we ended up getting stuck out during the day, trying to come in at 7 o'clock in the morning, and they would have someone out there spotting us, and they would try and shoot mortars at us just as we were coming in the last mile.
Mm-hmm. And would you leave anybody out there to try to kind of interdict the place they'd spot you from? Would you occupy that hill, or?
It was, the hill we were told had IEDs all over it,
Oh.
so we were told to stay away from it. We walked around the base of it a few times. There were a couple other hills where there was more civilians where
Mm-hmm.
we didn't think they had as many IEDs, so sometimes we would just send a gun team out with heavy weapons, and they would actually go out 20-30 minutes before us and set up an overwatch position, and then we would move out.
Mm-hmm.
But we found the fastest way to usually do it, and the easiest, was just to wait till 10 or 11 o'clock at night, depending on the moon, and then we would just quietly run out. We could get outside the gate before they could do anything.
Right.
And we would vary our times when we came back in, and sometimes we would circle around, wait a few minutes, then go back in. And they can't shoot at night,
Mm-hmm.
so they couldn't really do anything.
All right.
So it kind of became a cat and mouse
Yeah.
game.
Sort of know what it sounds like. All right. Now, did you spend your whole time in Afghanistan working out of that one base?
We went out that one base the whole time for, well, the first 6 months or so. And then they shut that fob down, that cop down.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got moved, I believe about 15 miles away to Fob Boris, which was a lot bigger base. And there was a lot more people there.
Mm-hmm.
So we spent a couple months tearing everything down. And then we ended up spending 5 or 6 days sleeping in actual sand-built bunkers and stuff, waiting for the go-ahead to actually finish moving out.
Mm-hmm.
So once we left, they had a wrecking crew that came in, and they bulldozed everything, dug big pits, and buried anything that was valuable, moved all the food out, burned everything we could.
Okay. During the first 6 months when you were there, when you were at the same base, did the situation change at all, or was it pretty much the same when you left as when you got there?
It seemed like it changed a lot. We went through the small town that was there a couple times. The civilians could see some of the patches were different. We acted different. We did our patrols different. So we tried to work with the civilians a lot, as much as we could. So we did a couple patrols around the area. We'd have some villagers that would come out, and they'd walk up a couple 100 yards to the gate, and then we'd send someone out there to talk with them. Usually an interpreter to see what they wanted, and try and talk with them as much as we could. It seemed like the presence and stuff we did, we tried to be proactive as much as we could to keep the Taliban away from that area.
Okay.
And then from what I understand, once we left, they just came right back.
Mm-hmm. Now, basically, do you think the civilians were happy to have you there because they didn't like the Taliban, or were they just trying to get along with you, or?
From what we could see, we talked to some of the interpreters who knew the town a lot better, and they said they liked us being there, but it's tricky for them. They get punished if they help us.
Yeah.
So they don't want to really interact with us. And then just where we were at, stuff, we weren't able to actually just walk through the bazaar and talk to people randomly, or actually get to know them a lot better. And I wasn't in a leadership position, so I don't know the actual thought of the leaders that were there,
Okay.
whether they strongly supported us or not.
And who were your interpreters? Were they Americans or Afghans?
We had 2 Afghan interpreters. I didn't really work with them as much. They would work with a lot of the leadership and stuff like that when we would go on patrol.
Mhm.
We had one guy who was National Guard who operated a communications surveillance system where you could
Mhm.
listen into incoming traffic from the Taliban. So we could listen to the radio traffic, and a lot of times he would repeat stuff that he heard. I believe he could speak Pashto and Dari a little bit,
Mhm.
which was the dialect they used. And then sometimes we'd have the interpreter with us. So we could understand a little bit of what they were saying.
What kinds of things were they talking about?
They would always say, if they come over here, we're going to attack them.
Mhm.
If the Americans do this or that. And a lot of times we would just turn around and go right towards them. Sometimes it was warranted where we would skip that area, or we'd circle around and avoid a certain area.
Mhm.
They would always say, we have an IED here, and we did this or that. Very rarely was it ever followed through.
Okay.
We think they knew we were listening to them, and sometimes it was, maybe they were trying to hype their guys up and they just couldn't follow through, or they were just trying to toy with us.
Okay. Now, did you have any means of detecting IEDs, or did you just try to stay away from places that had them?
We had some trucks that had a detector on there that would jam any incoming signals.
Mm-hmm.
We had mine detectors and stuff like that. But the terrain we're in was, I guess, almost like a ocean or like a raisin. There were just small hills and valleys. So it was really hard to actually plant.
Mm-hmm.
We could see everything that was going on for the most part right in front of us. And it was really hard to hide any IDs.
Mm-hmm.
We did end up having one truck that drove over one. We're not sure if it was a pressure plate or command detonated, which you can't stop.
Mm-hmm.
The only way to stop it is to either catch it before they set it off, if it's command detonated, or if it's pressure plate, catch them before they put it in,
Mm-hmm.
or try not to drive over it.
Which would a command detonate? Wouldn't that be?
Command
A signal?
detonated is someone has a wire.
Oh, there's a
and
wire.
Sometimes
Okay.
it's I think some of them will call it angel hair wire.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a small copper wire, and it can be like a thread, and they'll stretch it a mile or two.
All right. So
So
if you got a wire, you can't jam it. So
You can't jam it. Pressure plates, went through a lot of the training where they showed us the different IEDs they had built. And there's a lot of different types of pressure plate IEDs. They'll try and use springs and stuff like that. So they're only detonated if you're over 140 pounds or so.
Mhm.
So most of the troops with their gear weigh significantly more than a lot of the population. So a teenager might be able to walk right over it and you don't see it.
Mm-hmm.
And then someone else comes behind it and steps on it and will set it off.
Okay. Now, if you think back to the 6 months in the small base, are there any other particular events or impressions that stand out in your memory from that phase?
I thought after a while, I'm sure my wife thought it was nerve-wracking, but I would try and call her every evening.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times when I would call her because of the time difference, they would shoot mortars at us and I would have to hang up on her. We never knew when they were gonna. My team leader was there. They ended up trying to get overrun. At least once. We were told every unit before us had, sometime in the spring, they would try and overrun us.
Okay.
So it was, the whole time we were there, it was just waiting for an attack. That never really came. It was a couple small sporadic attacks, but nothing like the 300 people or so that had attacked it a couple times before.
Okay. So when they did sort of probe you or approach you, what happened?
For the most part, they wouldn't really fight us up front. It was just shooting mortars at us, RPGs,
Mm-hmm.
and stuff like that. And we thought it was pretty funny. For a while when they got pretty good, it was around 7 o'clock in the morning every single day. It was like our alarm clock.
Mm-hmm.
They would shoot mortars at us. We would jump up in our t-shirts and PT shorts and just run out to the bunker and just wait.
Okay.
And they would just go back. But after a while, we did get good enough to where we could go out, and we did ambush once.
Okay. What happened then?
That was pretty good. We actually went out, and it was a textbook ambush, linear ambush, where we went out early in the morning near one of the Wadi systems that was about just over a mile away on the opposite side of the bazaar.
Mm-hmm.
Civilians would drive trucks and stuff back and forth, going to the different little towns. And we knew that they were traveling up that early in the morning to shoot RPGs at us, mortars and stuff like that. And we walked out there before they saw us. And we're out there for about half an hour before we saw someone walking by.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like a textbook ambush. They never even saw us coming.
Mm-hmm. All right. But how close do they have to get to use the RPGs?
they don't really have a specific distance. They're not accurate more than a couple hundred yards.
Mhm.
They start to fishtail a lot.
Okay.
They would shoot them from 400 or 500 meters away, 600 meters away.
Okay.
I can't remember off the top of my head what the actual distance is. They usually have to. They'll only go so far,
Hmm.
and they'll just kind of.
Okay. So it's harassment rather than aimed fire at that point.
Harassment. We did have a couple guys, 3 or 4 days after I had gotten there. From what I understand, there was 2 or 3 guys had snuck up and were trying to probe us a little bit
Hmm.
and shot a couple RPGs at us. And probably like 2 o'clock in the morning, and they ended up calling close air support in and dropped 2 JDAMs, 2 500-pound laser guided bombs.
Okay.
So it was a pretty fireworks show we saw that night.
Hmm.
And after that, they never really messed with us. It was just more, they're just going to throw everything at us as soon as they can. So it was more just harassment.
Okay. When you would patrol or go out with the Afghans, would you have any kind of air support or anything like that?
Our company commander was really good about that. Every single time we went out, we tried to have at least Apaches on station.
Hmm.
We did have a Predator that was on station a lot of times, and they could see us. From what I understand, there was Special Forces, the Green Berets, had a base that wasn't too far from us that they would operate out of. So we never had to go out there. We never messed with them, never saw them.
Hmm.
But usually the SF and stuff like that, the guys like that will have Predators and stuff like that on station.
Hmm.
So he would always have stuff come by. We did have at least 2 different times where the Taliban did try to ambush us once, and we managed to get back over a berm,
Hmm.
and they just shot a couple RPGs at us and some small arm fire. I did feel a couple bullets go by my head and saw them by my hands.
Okay.
Went over the hill, and the A&A shot some RPGs back at them,
Hmm.
and we had a couple F-15s did the show of force.
Hmm.
They would come in 100 feet off the ground and come screaming by. So that was pretty cool. One came by one day going supersonic. So we had radio traffic that they were going to get ready to ambush us.
Hmm.
So there was a couple close calls, but for the most part, some of the other documentaries and stuff I've seen, it wasn't nearly as bad as what we were expecting.
Yeah. Okay. And if they're going to ambush you, were they going to do that as you were going out of the base or into it or farther away?
We would set up and then take off before they could actually see us coming out.
Hmm.
And they was usually so fast they couldn't get us. So they would usually try and wait, if it was during the day, to ambush us as we came back.
Okay.
We were far enough away from any hills or anything like that. They really couldn't get close enough to us to actually attack us with small arms fire.
Mhm.
And the only option for them was really to shoot mortars at us.
All right.
So that was really their best option for them.
Okay.
Sometimes at night they would try and do something like that, or if we tried to go through or right near the bazaar or some of the other small towns in the area, they had a lot better chance in the city.
All right.
But it was more of a cat and mouse game. We would hear radio traffic and we would scoot a different way.
Mhm.
Try and outthink them. We never took the same route twice.
Okay. Do you have any sense that they kind of backed away some in the latter part of your stay there, or a little more careful about what they did with you?
It seemed like the farther we got, the closer the cat and mouse game got. We proactively tried to go after them the best we could, but it was more like we would step their way and they would just step around us. So no matter which way we turned, we could never really get head to head.
Mm-hmm.
One day we ended up going through taking pictures and fingerprints of a lot of people. We did it all morning, and then we tried to go straight through one of the small villages, and they shot at us a couple times with some RPGs. And then we tried taking off and actually going back to our cop mid-morning, probably 11 o'clock, and that's when they actually started trying to shoot small arms fire at us.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the only times they actually shot small arms at us. That was pretty effective for the most part, but it only took a couple minutes for us to return fire and suppress them enough to back off.
Okay. Now, did your unit take casualties while you were there?
We were the only company that didn't take any casualties. We lost 6 guys out of our battalion, so out of the 4 companies. We did have some guys that got stepped on a couple IEDs. One guy got shot in the arm.
Okay,
But
so
for the most part, we were
you were wounded but not killed.
not killed. Our company was the only one.
All right. So now when you move to the larger base, what are you doing from there?
From there, we were getting ready to shut Fob Tillman down. They were getting ready to shut that down. And it was more out in the open. There wasn't a whole lot of foot patrols we could do. We did a couple mounted patrols, and then after that, I stayed and pulled gate guard for one of the entry control points for the Afghan National Army. Some of their guys would come through. They had cooks and stuff. People that deliver food would come through. Some of my friends that got handpicked to go on security patrol. They walked the mountain. They walked the ridge tops, kind of escorting the wrecking crew that was driving through. So they were gone for a couple weeks. They operated out of another base, and then they came back. And then one of the last big patrols, I went with them, escorting the crew out when they actually got done, and they were ready to come back after about a week and a half, 2 weeks. Then we escorted them back out, and that was about it for another 2 or 3 weeks. Then we came home.
Okay. And during this period, would the Taliban attack you at that base, or still harass you with mortars?
They would shoot a lot more mortars at us. That was a lot bigger base, and we had 3 or 4 155 howitzers that were out there, so they could actually shoot back. Their incoming radar detection was a lot better. We had one at our small base that we had, but from my understanding, they could either have the warning system on, or they could track the incoming mortars. So when we're at our smaller base, for the first couple weeks, they would have the warning system come on. So they would shoot a mortars at us. We'd hear the warning, the classic siren going off, and we'd all take off running, duck down, and they would shoot back. At the bigger base, they had it down a lot better. As far as I know, I don't really have any anti-mortar systems that can actually shoot it out of the sky. But there was a couple sporadic mortars that would hit, but nothing like what we were used to.
Okay.
They actually shot mortars at us one day when me and my friend were first walking around, and we heard the mortar hit, and we threw ourselves on the ground, and then we looked around and no one else had done it, and it wasn't even anywhere near us. So we thought it was kind of embarrassing, but...
Okay. And then while you're there, could you eventually learn to tell a little bit better whether or not it was going to be close to you? Or?
Yep. After the first couple weeks in country, you could kind of... It was a really faint pop. One of my friends actually had some hearing damage from some machine gun fire. He couldn't hear. He would always ask you to repeat yourself. I know I talk pretty low sometimes, but he would constantly have people have to repeat stuff, but he would hear the pop go off every time. And sometimes he would just take off running and you just run off with him. So after the first month or so, you could hear the definite pop, and then there's probably a 8 to 10 second delay before it actually go off. And they would usually shoot a couple off at once. So you would hear a pop, everyone would take off running, and then you could usually get behind cover in time. And then you would have 2 or 3 go off pretty close to each other within a few seconds. And then sometimes there might be a couple minute delay, and they might try and shoot a couple more at us before we could shoot back at them, just to see if anyone would come out of cover. And then you would always have to wait, I believe, 20 minutes or so. We would wait around for the all clear, just to make sure they weren't going to try and wait us out, try and catch someone out in the open.
Okay. Do you know why you were shutting these bases down?
Just starting to pull all the troops out of Afghanistan.
Okay.
They started closing all the smaller command posts and just trying to draw everything back. Ours had been there for a while, and it wasn't of much strategic importance, as far as I know. So we just started closing all those down.
So you're not turning it over to the Afghan military because there's not really a point to that, or?
No. I was still a private then. I don't remember a whole lot about exactly why we did everything we did, but I know ours wasn't important enough for them to want to keep it manned. And there was a lot of other bases that were a little bit farther away from us that were manned by the Afghan National Army, strictly them. So as far as I know, they just kept those open, and we were just kind of one of the bases that wasn't needed.
Okay.
So we tore everything down and tried to make it as close to what it was when we first got there, where it looked considerably different within 2 weeks.
All right. And then kind of shutting that down, that's pretty much the end of your tour in Afghanistan.
That's pretty much it.
Okay. And then how do they get you back?
When we got back, we pretty much did a reverse order. We went back to Manas. And we went from there back to
Germany and...
back to Bagram.
Okay.
Then we went, once we got to Bagram and after we actually got to leave, Then we flew from there back to Kyrgyzstan,
Yeah.
Germany, in reverse order.
Okay. And now you get to leave when you get home?
We got back, we got to turn all of our equipment in. The ceremony when we got back was pretty fast. I actually I was one of the first people to come back.
Mm-hmm.
So I flew back with some guys who were out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky. So I actually flew back to the base with them and was in the other room when they all did their. They got off the plane and went out on the runway and all their family met them. And then they took us into the big hangar and we stayed there for probably 6 hours. They told us something was wrong with the airplane, so they had to fix it. So we were there for a while, then got back on the plane, then flew from there back to Kansas.
Okay. Now, does the Army do anything to sort of help you back with the transition to being back in the States or seeing your family again? Or is it just, here you go?
Pretty much here you go. I know you hear some stories, a lot of people, it might have been a little bit different when we deployed. We did 9 months, no leave. Some of the other guys that did in the beginning of the war did longer deployments, but they usually got to come home for leave for at least a week or two. And I could see where that was a lot harder, where you go from, you're in Iraq one day, 3 or 4 days later, then you're back stateside, and you got to turn around and go right back after a week or so. So for us, I guess it was a little bit better. We weren't there quite as long, but we got no leave, so it was more of, our decompression was just the amount of time it took us to come back, which was probably a week or two.
Okay. And then once you do get back, how much leave do you get?
I think we could take at least a month.
Okay.
I think I took 3 weeks. I broke my foot when we did one of my last patrols.
Okay.
So I came back early to try and get it looked at because I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know exactly what. So I had to come back.
And how did you break your foot?
We were doing one of our patrols. When we shot Fob Tillman down, I was doing escort for the guys who were driving the dozers and stuff back. I was probably about 135 pounds, and then I was carrying probably 120 pounds or so. And it was probably one of the hardest patrols I've done. And from what I know, it was just the sheer weight. Just rocky ground and stuff like that. I fractured the bone in the bottom of my foot, and it got worse. It wasn't bad enough to get airlifted out. I know one of my friends on the previous patrol, escorting them in, fell down and broke his leg, and he had to get air-vac'd out. So me, I just walked on it for a while, came back, we had about a week off, then we did one last foot patrol where nothing happened. That was probably 10 or 12 miles, and it just kept compounding on itself. It would heal up a little bit, then I'd walk on it, the bone would rub against the nerve, and I'd come back in, it would heal up enough.
Okay.
So an x-ray didn't catch it. I went on leave for about 3 weeks and came back, and then spent about 6 months trying to figure out what it was.
Okay.
Took a little while to get a bone scan, and then the bone scan caught it.
Okay. So when you come back from leave, so you're just back at Fort Riley again at this point?
Went back to Fort Riley, and it was pretty much the same as when I had first gotten there, where everyone had just came back from leave. I believe we had 1 or 2 new privates that were waiting on us when we got there. And then over the next couple of months, we got more and more. As people get promoted, they get transferred out to different companies. That way there's no conflict of interest when possible. And
At what point do you get promoted?
I got promoted about 6 months in when I hit my 1.5 year mark. I got promoted from private to private first class. And then I believe a day or two after I got back is when I actually picked up specialist. And then I was in and out of the hospital trying to get my leg looked at. So I never went to get sergeant.
Okay.
Usually I have to pass a PT test and go to the promotion board and stuff like that. And if you're on profile, trying to get your foot looked at or any other thing, then they won't send you to the promotion board.
All right. Now, is the foot, did that have anything to do with your leaving the Army, or were you ready to go anyway?
Yep. It took about 6 months to figure out what was wrong. I believe it was August of I got back February 2nd, 2013. It was probably August of 2013 before I figured out what was wrong. And then I believe it was December 6th of 2013 when I got my first surgery. And that took a couple months. It took about a month to heal up. I was in sneakers for a while. Couldn't get my foot in a boot. And then there was a lot of healing up afterwards. They went in my foot, took the bone out from my big toe, so my big toe would just kind of flop around. There was no
Okay.
tendon. I had no muscle in the foot,
Mm-hmm.
so I really couldn't still walk or run. And then after about another 3 or 4 months, probably going into March of 2014, they decided they were going to med board me and just do a medical discharge.
Mm-hmm.
After I tried getting better and it just wasn't working.
Okay. But you still wind up being in until officially until 2017.
That took about almost a year, about 9 months to actually go through the med board process.
Right.
You have to go through and do your medical evaluation after they've finally decided they want to start the med board process.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of paperwork you have to go through. You got to do all your discharge paperwork, and then all the information you submit for your med board claim has to come back after it gets processed, and you have to agree to it.
Mm-hmm.
When I first got it back, I believe they only rated me at 10%. I had gone and saw a doctor right before I came back from deployment to try and get my foot looked at, but they didn't have any x-ray equipment or anything like that. So I just came back to get looked at, and they told me the computers had crashed. They didn't have anything on file. So I had to go over to another unit and talk to somebody.
All right. Now at this point, this tape is about up, so we're going to pause here. Okay.
Start off again.
All right. So we were kind of talking about sort of the end of your time in the service. So once you get back and you've got the foot injury and so forth, there's just this extended process of having you muster out, and so you're not going to be able to re-enlist. Was the original plan to re-enlist and do another hitch, or?
I'd been talking about it with my wife. She had just found out she was pregnant, and she had her daughter right before I got out, June 18th of 2014. So it was right around the time I found out I was getting med boarded.
Yeah.
I was kind of on the fence if I wanted to re-enlist. My granddad did tanks for a while, so I was considering re-enlisting to go. I was kind of at the point where I wasn't sure if I wanted to stay in or try and do anything else. And then kind of got made up for it.
Medical thing kind of took over there at that point. While we were off camera, you were talking a little bit about another situation. You said there's a point when like a general would come out and visit the base.
Yep.
What happens when that goes on?
Well, the camp I was at, there were the latrines and stuff like that. We just had like little outhouses. We had wag bags. Some people might use them for camping. It's just almost like cat litter in them. You would just open them up, and that's where you would use the bathroom. If you had to take a leak, it was just a tube that was buried a couple feet in the ground.
Right.
We didn't shower very much. Our uniforms were pretty dirty. We only got to do laundry a couple times. A lot of it was washing socks in the ammo can, wiping with baby wipes and stuff like that. So, and especially being in the infantry, no women were allowed in at that time. So they didn't allow women out there. And there was only 2 or 3 women the entire 6 months, 7 months we were there where women had actually come out. And just the women just using the shampoo, or even some of the generals and stuff like that, just being clean. Even from a couple hundred yards away, just walking by that area, you can just smell where, not even perfume, just like the smell of fresh shampoo or clean clothes.
Yeah, smelling clean people.
Yeah, we thought it was pretty funny where someone would come out, and I walked by one day, and even after they left, you could just smell it for an hour or so. Just the smell of clean. Our CO commented a couple times that we all smelled pretty bad towards the end.
Yeah, but you really didn't have any way of washing yourself because you didn't have a regular water supply.
We had some water that was airlift. They would airlift in pallets of water. They would actually airdrop them off, push them with off pallets off the back of a C-130 that would come in to do a resupply drop with food and stuff like that. So we had pallets of water to drink with, and with bottled water you could do just about anything you want with. We would have non-potable water that the Afghan National Army would go down every week or 2 for us and actually pump some water up out of the well in the community bazaar. They would bring it back and put it into big blivets.
What do you do with that
really big
water?
blivets. They would use that water for, you can't drink it, but you could use it for showers. So I got 4 or 5 quick 60-second showers, including lathering up, and then we would use that for any laundry and stuff like that. But after a while, the water ran out, and it was too much trouble to actually go get the water. So a lot of times we'd go a week or two without washing our uniforms. We'd wash clean socks and try to wash the clothes our best we could with just some soap. We'd have our own laundry detergent that we brought with us, powder stuff, so it wouldn't spill or leak everywhere. And then we'd have ammo cans. Just dump some soap in there, bar of soap, or something like that. Wash it in an ammo can, rinse it out.
Okay.
I would set bottles of water out under the sun, let it heat up all day, and then at night in between where I didn't think we were going to get attacked, I'd walk out there and just wash by myself behind one of the buildings.
Mm-hmm. What did you do for food?
Food, we had pretty different food. We had pretty good food. We had 2 cooks who would come out. They would cook breakfast. We didn't do lunch. You could have an MRE if you wanted. And then we'd have dinner. Dinner was usually pretty big. There were some snacks and just bags of M&Ms and Skittles that were in what we called the chow hall. It was just a big room with some picnic tables. And you go in there and grab some cookies or drinks.
Yeah. Did you have Army cooks or were these civilians?
We had 2 Army cooks. We had one cook, Shelby. I think it was Sergeant Shelby. He was really good. He really liked actually going out to a little operating post that we had up on the hill. He thought it was really cool to go up there, and he wanted some pictures and stuff like that. He wasn't too big on gunfire and stuff like that, so he thought it was cool. A couple times they let him go out. He got to actually walk up the hill when we would do rotations. We would do 3 days of patrols, 3 days of guarding the OP or security with the A&A at our compound. And I was up there a couple times where he would actually load a backpack full of some energy drinks and cookies and candy, some small packs of beef jerky and stuff we would get. And he actually carried up there himself to give us something as a thank you. And he did a really good job of giving us some really good food. He really put some effort into it.
Okay. So it wasn't just life on MREs the whole time you were there?
Not the whole time.
Okay. Now when you were at Tillman, was there more or better food, or was it pretty much the same?
I think the food was about the same. It was a lot bigger there from what I saw. I was only there a couple days. I think the food was about the same, and then we left. And I went back. We pulled security on one of their OPs for about a week, and we just had strictly MREs. And then after that, we got picked up by Chinooks again. And then we got taken out into the valley ahead of the convoy, and we lived out there for about 5 or 6 days. I remember I was out there for Thanksgiving Day, 2012 Thanksgiving Day, and I was up on one of the OPs where I saw my friends were out doing a patrol. And the little bird came in, and the pilot swooped in. I thought he was going to shoot at me or something like that, because I didn't have a radio, and he scared me. He came in, hovered a couple feet over my head, and then reached out and gave me a bag of Kit Kats. And that was our Thanksgiving dinner. So I saved all the candy and gave it to everyone else who came back and let them have it. I thought it was pretty cool just getting to reach up and grab something from somebody.
Okay. And you'd mentioned calling home. Did you just have, was there
We had,
your own cell phones, or what did you have?
we didn't have cell phones. We didn't take cameras out with us. RCO didn't want any cameras out when we were on patrol.
Yeah.
So I had a couple of pictures from within the cop, and then we had, I believe, 4 to 6 phones, landlines inside of a command post, and then we had, I believe, 8 to 10 computers.
Okay, so you could send an email home?
We could send emails, a call. I usually tried to call every day or two. Talk to my wife for about half an hour, say hey. Ask her what's going
What time of day would you call? I mean, was there a civilized time to call? Because the time difference is so big.
I want to say there was a 6 or 7 hour time difference, so I believe I would call towards the evening, probably around 3 or 4 o'clock before I ate dinner.
Okay.
Sometimes later in the evening if I waited late enough. We didn't really have a specific bedtime unless we were doing a patrol or something like that. Later that night, I'd call her at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, my time. A couple hours before we went on patrol. If we were going out for more than a couple of days, I'd be like, I'll be back. You won't hear from me for a couple of days.
Okay. All right.
Could order stuff online. The Wi-Fi wasn't good enough. We didn't have Wi-Fi, but the computers weren't good enough to Skype or anything where I was at originally. So I only got to do that right before I came back.
Right.
But I would order flowers and stuff like that.
All right. Okay, so now, then when you do get discharged, then, so now we made it into 2017, what do you do from there?
I got out I had about 60 days or 40, 45 days of leave. So I got out in the beginning of December of 2014, and then I was on leave.
Or, yeah,
I was on
14,
terminal
yeah,
leave
right.
until this January 30th,
Mm-hmm.
2015,
Right.
and then I got some disability check.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty small, and I got severance pay when I got out. I knew I wanted to go back to school, and school had started in January, but
Mhm.
because I had terminal leave, I didn't calculate that in. I couldn't get registered for school in time. And then summer classes, they weren't really doing anything. So I decided just to wait till August of 2015 to actually begin school.
Okay.
So I just kind of I didn't have a whole lot of time with my wife and daughter in between training and deploying.
Mm-hmm.
So I just spent the whole summer with them.
Okay.
We went on a road trip, went down to Georgia, then up through North Carolina. Got to go to the Biltmore Estates and spent some time together.
Yeah. Now, did you have any trouble or just odd things as you're readjusting to civilian life? Or was it so gradual in a way because of all the medical stuff and what you were doing that it just eased you out?
It was definitely a lot different when I came back from deployment, trying to reintegrate
Mm-hmm.
and just getting, even though I had that decompression time, just getting readjusted to civilian life. And I remember driving a car after I came back. I'm used to driving big up armored trucks and stuff, and then my wife had bought me a truck when I came back, small pickup. So I was just trying to get used to driving a pickup,
Mhm.
and then being able to actually get up in the middle of the night and I want something to eat, I can go get whatever I want. But then it was when I got out and we came up here in Michigan, it wasn't a whole lot of, to me it wasn't a big difference.
Mhm.
I was kind of ready to get out and ready to sleep in whenever I wanted. But then after a while it got boring pretty quickly. You get used to that routine.
All right. And then where did you choose to go to school?
Go to school at Ferris State University. Took a placement test right before I got out to see where I would place
Mm-hmm. And
educational wise, and decided to go to the heavy equipment program up here.
Okay. All right. And now you're basically graduating?
I'm
Yes.
almost done. Next week will be my last day of classes, and then I'll be walking in commencement May 17th. Or, I'm sorry, May 11th. So
All right.
about
this
2
is,
weeks
yeah,
from now.
2019. Okay. And I guess if you look back and then you're going to move out from here.
I took a job with Kiewit Construction. And I'm going to be going out near Washington, D.C. for the first couple months,
Mm-hmm.
working on a project there. They're actually set up a lot similar to the Army, where I just kind of move as the work goes.
Mm-hmm.
So I could go from D.C. to Washington State, Texas, pretty much anywhere in the country.
Okay.
So working long hours, couple days off. So it's a lot similar to the Army.
Okay.
So
All right. Now, to think back over the time you spent in the Army, how do you think that affected you, or what did you take out of it?
I got to learn a lot, especially being in the infantry. It's a lot different than some of the other MOSs. Their job specialty where you just come in and you're doing legal work or something like that. You're just with a bunch of different guys. You get really close to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Then when you get out, there's really nothing else to compare it to. I know some of my friends got out, try and do a lot of sports and stuff like that, do rugby. Try and find something else that kind of matches it. Even being here with a lot of the other veterans, it's hard to relate to anybody else. There's not anyone else I've really met that really has gone through the same thing as me.
Mm-hmm.
I did meet one guy for a couple months and he graduated. So it's hard readjusting there.
Yeah. So kind of unless they're in the infantry and that kind of thing, they're not going to have had those experiences. But they're also not the guys that you spent that time with.
Right.
Because that's where a lot of the bonds get formed.
Right. And even when I've met some of the other people, even before I got out, who are infantry, it's kind of like a small brotherhood.
Mm-hmm.
You meet a lot of guys who do the same thing. Sometimes I find I can talk to other veterans, especially like Vietnam vets,
Mm-hmm.
who are in the infantry or had a lot more active role, I guess. It's kind of hard to relate to someone who was a mechanic or a pilot.
Yeah.
Where we still have something in common, but something's missing.
All right. Okay. Well, you've done a very good job telling your story for us. So thank you very much for sharing it today.
Thank you for having me.